Hey everyone, welcome to the Decorative Den. My name's Charity and I'm so happy you're here today. The Decorative Den is a look inside my craft room where I share all things crafting, planning, and DIY. And I am really excited for today's video because I have a craft tutorial for you where I'm going to be sharing how I made this fall themed wall hanging. So if you are interested in seeing the steps to this project, then just keep watching. So starting with supplies, the first thing we're going to need is a 10-inch embroidery hoop. We're also going to be using some burlap fabric as well as a variety of felt. Now I'm using just polyester craft felt, and I'm going to be using this dark brown and light orange color for my pumpkin, and then these additional 3 colors for my leaves in the background. I'm also going to be using some craft paint. So this is acrylic paint in the brand Craft Smart, and I am using the color Espresso. For tools, I'm going to be using a pair of scissors, a ruler, a paintbrush, and this is a relatively thin paintbrush, and definitely you're going to want a smaller one for this project. I'm also going to be using a Sharpie marker and some hot glue. And then in addition to these supplies, the other thing you're going to need is this Hello Pumpkin wall decor template. So this is a free printable I have linked below for you, and you can download it and print it out. And when printing, I suggest using cardstock or a heavier paper, just because we are going to be using this to do some tracing, and so a heavier paper is going to help with that. Now that we have our supplies, the first thing I'm going to do is take my burlap fabric and center it within my embroidery hoop. And I'm not going to keep the fabric in here for very long. All I'm really doing right now is creating a nice crease within my fabric. So making sure that my embroidery hoop is nice and tight and is really creasing that fabric, because then that crease is going to give me a guide for when I lay down the letters for this project. So next I'm going to take my template and layer it underneath my burlap fabric. And in general, burlap is a pretty loosely woven fabric, so you should be able to see those dark letters from the template through the fabric itself. And all I'm going to do is center the word pumpkin right in the middle of that creased area. And then I'm going to take my Sharpie marker and trace over the letters of the template, transferring them to the burlap fabric. Now, if you're not using burlap, or if you can't see the letters through your material when it's on a table, this step could also be done using a window or one of those tracing light boxes to make it easier to see everything. But once you've traced everything, we're going to put our burlap back into the embroidery hoop. And I'm going to take some time here to really make sure that my letters are centered and that my fabric is pulled tight and that my hoop is secure. And I'm going to want to do all of this because it'll make painting my letters so much easier. And that is the next step. So just taking your paintbrush and your brown craft paint, we're going to go through and follow the Sharpie guide we just made and paint over all of those letters. And I will admit, this step can be really frustrating, especially if you are a perfectionist, just because burlap is a very textured fabric. And so I did find it challenging at times to get the paint to go in a straight line. And the best way I could kind of remedy that was making sure that there was a very generous amount of paint on my paintbrush. I found that when my paintbrush was like fully saturated, it was really easy to, 1, cover the actual Sharpie lines, and then 2, get the paint to fall in more of a straight line. For some reason, when I had less paint on my paintbrush, I just found it was difficult and I really couldn't get the letters to shape properly. So that is a little tip if you are having that same problem. But in general, you're just going to go through and cover all of your letters with paint. And then once that's done, we are going to set aside our hoop and just let our paint dry. And then while that's drying, we're going to go through and cut out all of our felt shapes that we're going to add at the end of this project. So we're going to start with our pumpkin, and to do that, we're going to get our template back out and cut off the bottom portion of it, because these are the shapes that we're going to be tracing to make our pumpkin. Now, once you have all three shapes cut out, we're going to take that light orange felt or whatever color felt you're using for the body of your pumpkin and trace around those template pieces. And I like to take my template pieces and flip them upside down so the printed side is facing the felt fabric. That way, after I've cut out my felt shapes and I flip them back around, they're going to be facing the same direction as the shapes were originally on the template. But after I have everything traced, I'm going to cut out my shapes. And I find it best to cut within the inside of that Sharpie line, so that way all of the marker is on that outside scrap fabric that we're going to get rid of. And that way there's very minimal markings on the actual felt we're using in our project. So as you can see, I'm cutting on the side with marker, but then when I add these felt shapes to my hoop, I'm going to be flipping them upside down so that way the side that didn't have any marker on it will be the side facing the front of the project. I hope that makes sense. But moving on to the leaves, what I'm going to be doing is taking my felt and just marking out every 2 inches. And I'm doing that because what we're going to do is just cut out strips of felt that are 2 inches wide. And these do not need to be perfectly straight or perfectly measured. This is just to give us a general guide so that all of our leaves are about the same shape. And as you can see here, I am cutting out 4 strips of felt, but really you probably only need 2 per color. And that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to go through and cut out at least 2 strips of every color that you want your leaves in. Next, I'm going to take one of those strips and I'm going to cut off about a 1 inch wide section. So I'm going to make a rectangle that is 2 inches by 1 inch. And then within that rectangle, freehand cut a very simple leaf shape. And you really don't need to worry about these being symmetrical or all being the same. I think, nature is not totally perfect or totally symmetrical. And so having leaves that are, different widths, maybe some are more round, some are more angular, all of that adds interest and character to your project. And I liked having a variety of shapes when I was actually gluing down and creating my final design. So all of that is to say, don't worry if your leaves aren't perfect or exactly the same. But you're just going to go through and you're going to do that same process with all of your felt, so all 3 colors. And now that we have all of our felt shapes cut out, we're going to get our embroidery hoop back out. And by this time, your paint should be dry, and you will need it to be dry for this next step. This is also the point where you will make sure that everything is centered the way you want it and that your hoop is as tight as possible because we are going to be finishing off the hoop. So what I'm going to do is cut off all of this extra burlap fabric, and I'm just going around the hoop and leaving about, I'd say 3/4 to 1 inch of fabric around the edge. Next, I'm going to take my hot glue and I'm just going to add it to the inside of this wooden hoop. And then I'm going to fold over my burlap fabric, securing it to the hoop with that hot glue. And so please be careful during this step. I am using a low heat gun just because the fabric is pretty porous, and so you definitely could potentially burn yourself in this step. So, just be careful. It could be helpful to use a popsicle stick or a pencil or something to push down the fabric. That way you're not touching it directly with your fingers like I am modeling here. But once that's done, you're gonna flip your hoop back around, and here comes, in my opinion, the fun part. So this is when you get to lay down all of your felt pieces and kind of figure out what you want your final hoop to look like. So certainly with my pattern and the way I laid down my words, I had intended to have the pumpkin centered at the bottom of my hoop with some leaves crawling up the sides, filling the bottom half of the hoop. And you certainly can use this same kind of shape on yours if you like it, or, feel free to be creative and make it your own. So I took a really long time playing with my felt pieces and trying to figure out, what shape I wanted and what color balance. But once I had a general idea of what I wanted, I started gluing down my leaves. And for this step, I suggest just gluing down the base of your leaves, so the part of the leaves that will be kind of covered and layered over, and then leaving the exposed tips of the leaves loose. And the reason I do it like that is because when I hang this on the wall, all of the leaves kind of tilt forward slightly, and it just creates this really beautiful 3D look. And that way the leaves don't look so stiff. I feel like they look like they're almost blowing in the breeze, which I think gives the final project a really nice look. So once you have all of your leaves glued down, the last thing we're gonna add is our actual pumpkin shape. And we're gonna do this by adding some hot glue to that center oval piece and laying it down on the large pumpkin body. And then once I have that centered and where I like it, I'm gonna add some hot glue to secure it to the hoop. And then I finish it off by just adding my stem to the top, which it should fit right snug with that body of the pumpkin. And that is it, guys. Your hoop is finished. I really love how this turned out. I think this hoop just adds like the perfect touch of fall, and I plan to hang this one on my craft room door as kind of a little welcoming sign for myself and anyone else who comes in. But in general, if you decide to do this craft project, please share it with me. You can tag me on Instagram at the Decorative Den. I really would love to see what you come up with, whether it's this project or maybe use the template for something else. Either way, I would love to see. And subscribe if you are interested in other crafting, planning, and DIY videos. But in general, thank you so much for being here, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye, guys.